right now. We are thrilled to welcome in Ross Tucker. He's the host of the Ross Tucker podcast. If you don't follow him on social media, at Ross Tucker NFL, you're missing out. One of the best in the business, one of the more entertaining guys on Twitter, and he does a great podcast. He broke down running backs this morning on his show with Greg Cosell. Check it out. We recommend it. And with that, we are thrilled to welcome in Ross Tucker to the show. Ross, give us a little bit on future fans, because we think it's a great idea and how it help build the next generation of the people who love and support the NFL.
You guys in Cleveland are going to appreciate this, because I met these guys. They actually live in Columbus, but they're both Bengals fans. And so a few years ago, when the Bengals made their run to the Super Bowl, they were watching the playoff game. They couldn't get their kids to sit down and watch the game with them. I don't know if anybody watching or listening or whatever, if you've ever tried to explain to a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old what football is like and how it works, it's very, very difficult. These guys have kind of cracked the code. It's a storybook-led activity box, which is amazing, right? You go ahead and you read a story, which a 5-year-old, 7-year-old wants to do, and then there's an activity like a ring toss game that teaches them the downs, because they couldn't get their kids to watch and their kids are like, we'll watch next year. They're like, no, you don't understand. We're the Bengals. This only happens like every 30 years. Sit your butt down on the couch and watch. So if you want your kid to love sports as much as you do, in particular football, and have that gift for the rest of their life, sitting there watching the Browns games with you, check out futurefans.com. These guys did a great job with it. And they're local for you guys, which is really cool. Futurefans.com.
You know, Ross, I'm glad. It's good to see you, and I'm glad you brought this company up, and I'm glad you're doing business with them. Because when I had not heard about it until I heard you were coming on, and so I go on the website to look at it, and I could understand where they were coming from, because as someone who grew up in New York rooting for the Cubs and the Bengals, my dad was, but my parent, like after my dad was out of the picture, I had nobody to ever celebrate good moments with. And when the Bengals did go to the Super Bowl, a few years ago, as you talked about, my son was 9, and he's not a big sports fan, but he got into it that postseason, and we watched it together, and it meant so much more to me to have him there watching it with me. So it is cool.
Well, and what's funny about that, Adam, is like my daughters, I work for the Eagles, and we live in Eastern PA. So, I took them to the Super Bowl. And obviously that was a great experience. My older one turned 13. I realized based on the questions they were asking me, I really did not do a very good job. They're 13 and 11. Now, I don't know if that's like if I get a pass because I'm away every weekend, right, or what, but they definitely did not know a lot about football other than they like to cheer on Penn State and the Eagles. I mean, they were asking now some of the questions were good, but even I, as a television analyst who did a couple Browns games last year, including that win over the Ravens, by the way, even I did a terrible job explaining football to my kids. So futurefans.com, evidently they're even better than I am.
Yeah. And by the way, Ross, I'm not sure, I'm just going to sound like I'm saying this because he's on with us, but Ross, in addition to doing a great job on the podcast, I especially love when you have Greg Cosell on it. You have him on every week, right? Isn't it every week?
Yeah, every week. Yeah, every week.
Yeah. So, but you really do a great job as an analyst. I like listening to you on the radio. I've heard you on the radio a number of times. You do a hell of a job. I feel like you're a little under the radar in terms of the NFL analyst game, but I'm impressed. I like listening to you. I feel like I learn, even doing this for 25 years, listening or watching you on the broadcast. So I appreciate your work.
So that means a lot. I love doing it. I'm kind of getting there, Adam. I'm getting there. I always say 3 things, right? If you watch me do a game, hopefully you learn something. Probably O-line, D-line play, but hopefully you learn something. Hopefully you can tell more than anything. I love it. Like, I love football. Yes. I have from the first moment my parents took me to a Penn State game. Like, I've always just adored the sport. And last thing is that hopefully you laugh. And you might be laughing at me. I'm cool with that. Just I hope you laugh at some point during the game.
No doubt.
You guys just brought up something. Obviously, you say you cover the Eagles. Jalen Hurts, they've been to a couple of Super Bowl. Bull talks about the Cincinnati Bengals. I think with Bengals have been to, 3 or 4?
3.
So this for Browns fans is like when we get to the draft and people say, nah, you don't want to reach on a quarterback. It's like your married friends that go home to somebody every day and you're single and you're like, don't worry about this marriage thing. It's way overrated. You're like, dude, I'm making my own. I sleep by myself. I make my own dinner, and I got to do my laundry. Are you trolling us? So when we get to these drafts and we waiting to go down to get to Shedeur Sanders or whoever it's going to be, when people try to tell us to take Abdul Carter, a defensive end, I get triggered. I'm like, no, I don't. I have Myles Garrett, and I'm not winning. Why would I get Abdul Carter still? I need a quarterback. So tell me why in this class. Would it not be a smart idea to take a quarterback?
You know, man, I totally sympathize with where you're coming from because it's funny. This happens in a lot of cities where I go on and talk with them. If they're not good and they don't have a quarterback, they really don't even care which one they take. It's like, just take a quarterback and give me hope, which a couple things on that. Number one, I think it's in part why teams do that sometimes. And number two, it's a horrible strategy. I mean, a terrible, terrible idea to just take one and hope that guy pans out with where you take him. I got to tell you, I think the Browns are in a bad spot, but a good spot, depending on your perspective, right? I think they're in a bad spot in the sense that I would not take a quarterback at 2, right? I firmly believe that Cam Ward will be the number 1 overall pick of the Tennessee Titans unless the New York Giants trade up to 1 because they're incredibly desperate to get a franchise quarterback there to try to save the jobs of their GM Joe Shane and head coach Brian Daboll. One way or the other, though, Cam Ward's going 1, right? So where does that leave the Cleveland Browns at 2? I personally would be very hesitant to take Shedeur Sanders with the number 2 overall pick. And part of that is because I'm not convinced he's really that much better of a prospect than some of the other guys that are available. So what I've said, and maybe you guys feel like you have that on some level with Pickett, what the Falcons are doing with Cousins is kind of muddying the waters a little bit. But I've said for a while, I thought the slam dunk for the Browns, okay, was to take either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, who would be an amazing pick at number 2. I'm a huge Travis Hunter guy. So you can't go wrong with either one of those guys. You either have Myles off one edge and Abdul off the other, or you have Myles rushing, and then a corner, you have Denzel and Hunter, and then Hunter can be one of your receivers in 3 receiver packages. So I love the idea of taking either one of those guys. And then in terms of the veteran quarterback, we can talk about whether that's Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson to compete with Pickett. But then I think you might have your pick at the top of the 2nd round. I don't know if it'll be the next quarterback. I don't know if Shedeur would still be there, but it wouldn't shock me. But even some of these other guys, maybe you really like Jackson Dart. A guy I'm very intrigued by is Jalen Milroe from Alabama. The guy is absolute lightning, okay, running the ball. I've had people tell me they think he's further ahead than Jalen Hurts was at this stage. I don't know if I agree with that or not. He does definitely have a stronger arm than Jalen Hurts. And the guy won the Campbell Trophy. I don't know if you guys are that familiar, but the Campbell Trophy is basically the academic Heisman. That's crazy impressive to me. I mean, to have the physical ability he has and then to also win the Campbell Trophy. So I like the idea of taking Jalen Milroe. And listen, if they really love one of these other guys, Jackson Dart or whoever, at the top of round 2, we can do that. I wouldn't waste the number 2 pick, though, on a guy like Sanders when there's a chance he's still available at the top of the 2nd round. But even if he's not, some of the guys that are very close to him in terms of how these teams have him ranked on their draft boards.
You know, when you did running backs today, and obviously the Browns, so for the moment, are moving on from Nick Chubb. You know, second round, third round, what running backs do you think would be a good fit for the Cleveland Browns?
Well, so what's interesting about that is, you're in a situation where they're saying it's one of the best running back drafts in a long time. Now, if you're talking later on, second or third round, you're not really talking about, Ashton Genty or Omarion Hampton or some of these other guys. But I can tell you on today's Ross Tucker podcast, Greg Cosell, he loves Damian Martinez, from University of Miami. I did one of his games that he was at Oregon State. He can really play later on. Obviously, both Ohio State kids are available, and you can decide which one you like differently. Those guys are very different players. Travion Henderson has the juice, more like Greg compared him to a Brian Westbrook or Aaron Jones type, whereas Judkins is more the sustaining runner. There's other guys, how can you not love Cam Scatterbo? Maybe we should go back to the Peyton Hillis era. Get Cam Scatterbo out there 20 times a game.
Yeah, there are a lot of It's an interesting draft, Ross, because it seems like the positions that are deepest in this draft are the positions that are not the positions that people are more enamored with, right? Tight end, running back, linebacker. It seems to be a very good draft for those three positions, but not the sexy left tackles, quarterbacks, wide receivers. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say, and it's a little bit weird to me that, that there aren't better players in this year's draft. People are saying that, of course, the year that the Browns are drafting, that the high end isn't great, although there's still plenty of 10 to 12 guys. Listen, the problem is if you're drafting like 15, 16, 17, 18, you might be drafting guys that teams have a second-round grade on. That's not the case for you guys, okay? You're going to get a difference-making player with the number 2 overall pick. I think that – I'm curious. You guys tell me. I know everybody wants a quarterback, but I already told you how we can split the baby and you can get a quarterback at the top of the second round. I'm curious, where are most of your viewers right now when it comes to Abdul Carter versus Travis Hunter? Because I think that's fascinating.
I think the majority of our viewers, listeners, want Abdul Carter. If I'm not taking a quarterback at 2, I'm 100% taking Travis Hunter.
I think people in this market love offensive linemen. You'll run across people in the grocery store. G. Bush, take an offensive tackle every year.
Will Campbell.
Take a deep tackle every year. And they love the trenches. But Travis Hunter to me is special. I don't know why you pass that up.
Just so you guys know, I did a Colorado State game this year on TV for CBS. So I watched a lot of Travis Hunter, and I live close to Penn State. So I've watched almost every snap Abdul Carter has played. I don't think you can go wrong with either guy. I will say this, the play you just showed, that interception right now against Colorado State, Travis Hunter, even just going to practice, he's like a unicorn out there. The way he attacks the ball, as much as I love Abdul Carter, okay? And he's not quite Micah, by the way, in terms of his movement skills, but he's got some similarities. Travis Hunter, you're getting 1.5 positions. You're going to have obviously one of the best corner duos in the league, but then you're going to have him out there on important passing downs when you have 3 receiver sets. It's really hard to argue with the value that Hunter would provide at, let's just call it, a position and a half. Abdul Carter, he's not playing running back for you. I think you could make an argument of just Hunter the corner versus Abdul Carter the edge rusher, but Hunter's giving you the receiver snaps too, which he's going to be a threat. He's going to be a factor. I would go Hunter, and I watched Abdul Carter when he was at LaSalle College High School outside of Philly. So I've been watching Abdul for a long time. I would even go Travis Hunter.
Real quick, just to follow up, because you asked about the fans. Mike just put a poll up like 3 minutes ago. We already got about 400 responses. So
Right.
quickly, the 400 responses, what's the percentage?
Yeah, we got 2,400 people watching live and only 400 responses in 3 minutes. So the other 2,100 people watching live, click on the
what are you
poll.
guys doing?
Let's get your votes in.
That's
But
still a lot of responses in like 3 minutes. But
that
go
is
ahead.
fair.
Yeah.
It's only been up for 2 minutes and it's almost 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But 58%, 57, it's going back and forth right now, teetering between 57 and 58%. Prefer Travis Hunter at 2 over Carter
all right.
if quarterback is not in
I'm
play.
pleasantly surprised.
You know, Ross, I want to go back to your Jalen Milroe in the second round because it's interesting that you say that. The thing about Jalen Milroe, well, I want to know what you think his flaws is because he was at the Senior Bowl, and they said his stock dropped, and the Browns coaching staff actually was working with him there. So, and obviously they got Tommy Rees as the offensive coordinator now, who's familiar with Jalen Milroe. So what are some things that you think Tommy Rees and that coaching staff thought about Jalen Milroe to discourage him from why couldn't he be a first-round pick? What's the flaws? What does he need to work on?
Yeah, well, first of all, if you're the Browns and you're working with Jalen Milroe and you love him, you should tell everybody, boy, this guy stinks. He really I don't know about this guy. I wouldn't take him to the 5th round. It's funny because 2 years ago, guys, I called Alabama Ole Miss for CBS. And I'm only telling you that because Tommy Rees was the OC for Alabama, and they had just benched Milroe the week before. They had benched him. He didn't play at all against South Florida. So this was his game coming back. So 2 things on Milroe. Number 1, he threw some like head scratcher interceptions, right? He had some really bad turnovers where you would just be like, what is this guy doing? The second thing is the belief right now is that he's not a polished, nuanced pocket passer. That's the concern. What I would say to you guys is a couple of things. Number 1, if you remember, the second half of the Tommy Rees year into the SEC championship game and the college football playoff, Milroe was playing really well for Tommy Rees. Tommy had Milroe playing at a high level. Now, he didn't elevate his game last year with Kalen DeBoer like people thought he might. He didn't take that next level step. I don't think the Alabama people and team around him was as good. Mm-hmm. And also, it's not easy for a guy to learn a new offense. What would he have done this past year with Tommy Rees? I wonder that. I don't know that. The beauty of if you get him in the second round is you can give him a little bit of time, right? You can go with Cousins or, Russell Wilson or Kenny Pickett or whatever for a while, see if it's going okay with those guys. But we know what the Browns want to get back to. They want to get back to running the ball, play action, bootlegs. This guy was like Alabama's fastest player. So I want you to picture you on all those bootlegs, okay? Him pulling out and running out there. When you run a bootleg, the reads are cleaned up. It's easier. It's not a straight drop back pass where you have to go through your progression reads. And either the guy's wide open. If it's not, Milroe can tuck it away and get a bunch of yards for the Browns. So, Tommy will know him better than anybody. So I'm sure he'll have a strong opinion of Milroe versus Jackson Dart versus Shedeur versus Ewers versus Kyle McCord. That would be funny if the Browns drafted Kyle McCord after the way you guys ran him out of Columbus.
Hey, listen, we didn't run him out of nowhere.
Ross, I want, as we look at all these quarterbacks, my final thing on this is, put on your crystal, look into your crystal ball here, and I believe in this day and age, I know that some fans think, you could have a mediocre quarterback and win a Super Bowl. I don't believe that. I think you have to have a tier 1 or tier 2 quarterback. So we'll say top 10 to make it easier. If you had to guess 5 years from now of all the quarterbacks in this draft besides Cam Ward, who has the best chance of being a top 10 quarterback, who would it be? Because that's the guy I'm going to draft.
Oh, such a great question. what's interesting to me too about that, Bull, is, I watch every Eagles game. Jalen Hurts did not perform like a top 10 quarterback for the most part this season until the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
The rest of their roster was just that good. But then he did when they needed him to, and they won both games by 30 points. Right? Because I was making the case, and this is mind-boggling if you think about it.
Yeah.
They would have beat the Commanders and the Chiefs even if he didn't play that well. Like, the Eagles could have won the Super Bowl with a quarterback playing average at best, which is unheard of, but sort of goes a little bit against what you said.
That's true.
Although I would agree, you need a guy that's tier 1 or tier 2. Man, that's tough. I always say when somebody asks me a question like that, I always say, what would I bet on?
Right.
Okay. What do I think is the most likely? And I would probably say Shedeur. I would probably say Shedeur over the other guys. But the guys in my head, when you ask that, it's Shedeur and Milroe. It's not Dart or Ewers or McCord. I think those other guys, to me, end up being backups. I think it's Shedeur or Milroe, and they are like polar opposites, okay? I mean, Milroe, the physical ability, the professionalism. Shedeur, just the great feel for throwing the ball from the pocket. The thing is you think about the tier 1 guys, Bull, okay? Think about Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes or a lot of these guys. That's not Shedeur Sanders. He doesn't have the big arm. He doesn't have the really impressive mobility. I mean, if you just watched him and Milroe throw or watched them run, you'd be like, yeah, no way, I'm taking that guy. For Shedeur Sanders to have success, he needs to be like Bo Nix. He really needs to be like, as Brian Callahan has compared him, he needs to be like Joe Burrow because he doesn't have a huge arm, doesn't run that well. That's asking a lot. I mean, Burrow is like a savant mentally and incredibly accurate, and he has star receivers there. I think that's asking a lot for Shedeur to be that good mentally and with his accuracy to be a tier 1 guy like a Burrow.
Ross, great stuff as always,
Appreciate
man.
it.
Everybody check out the Ross Tucker podcast. It's awesome. One of the best out there. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon.
Hey, great being on with you guys. Congrats on all your success. Bull in particular, known you for a long time. I'm thrilled you guys are killing it with this show. Happy to come on anytime. I got a YouTube channel. People want to check it out. Ross Tucker NFL. And don't forget about Future Fans. See you, boys.
Future Fans. It's cool. Thanks, Ross.
Ross Tucker,
Appreciate
one of the
it, man.
best
He's
in the
awesome.
business. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. We're going to react to some of the Shedeur stuff, but I got to get a quick read in first. Guys, Living for We joined the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show family yesterday. They are back today. What happens when a regular day at school turns into the worst day of your life? Unfortunately, that's a reality that happens way too frequently in today's world. Gun violence is the leading cause of death for young people in America and in communities of color. The impact is even greater. Every bullet fired creates 2 victims, the person in front of the gun and the one pulling the trigger. Living for We, Keep Your Head Up podcast is an award-winning show that focuses on real stories, real struggles, and real solutions in Northeast Ohio. New episodes drop every other Tuesday. The next episode comes out 1 week from today, where you'll hear from host Marlene Harris-Taylor and her new co-host Maisha Watkins, the executive director of the Cleveland Peacemakers. No one does a better job of bringing you stories from the front lines, the victims, the survivors, and those fighting for change. In each episode, they sit down with different organizations that are working to end gun violence and provide resources for those affected. Listen to Living for We wherever you get your podcasts or watch the video version on IdeaStream's YouTube channel. Learn more at ideastream.com/podcast/Living for We. Subscribe today for Living for We on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Mike, I love that IdeaStream. I love IdeaStream. I love this podcast, and I'm very proud that they're a part of our show. I think it's great.
It is. We're thrilled to have them on board. They're also the title sponsor of the Ultimate 216 show, which Earl does in terms of culture and sports.
Fantastic.
We had Ross come on right after we heard from Sean King. But you didn't get a chance to give us your 2 cents on Shedeur. We heard what Ross Tucker thought about Shedeur. So before we bring on John Fant in about 5 minutes, we'll just recap the rest of that conversation. What are your thoughts?
Guys, that was a fascinating conversation there with Ross, and I loved his analysis because so often people make things so black and white, and there's gray area, and he really told you about that. Like, in the end, he said, if I had to bet on any of these other guys, I'd bet on Shedeur, and yet he said, I wouldn't draft him at 2 because I think I might be able to get him at 33. And even if I don't, I know I can get Jalen Milroe, and I don't think the gap is that big. If he's right that the gap is not that big, and if he thinks Jalen Milroe is, then I understand where he's coming from. The reason I've all of a sudden gotten high on Deion Sanders. Shedeur Sanders.
If someone's not high,
you should have been high on Deion your entire life.
I've been high on Deion. The reason I've gotten high on Shedeur Sanders, and we've seen it pointed out, but Ross kind of pointed it out too. The comparisons, and I know he's not as highly thought of coming out of college, obviously, otherwise it would be a no-brainer he'd go 1. Yeah. But I've now heard a couple of people compare him to Joe Burrow. Yeah. Because Joe Burrow's elite traits are intangibles. Yeah. And that's the same thing with Shedeur. Now, I don't know that he's going to be as good as Joe Burrow. That's a pretty darn high bar. But his best traits are his intangibles. The guy's super smart. He's accurate. He has good ball placement. Yes, his athleticism. I think maybe his athleticism is overly criticized.
Yes, it is.
Dad was such a freak athlete.
Yes.
Right? So, he's probably a perfectly fine athlete. He's just not a special elite crazy athlete like Deion, who could be, you know what I mean? So I just think there's a lot of little things, and I think Shedeur's probably also got the safest floor. And listen, if he only lives up to his floor, which is mid-pack quarterback, that's not going to be good enough in the long term. But at least it gives you something to keep you competitive potentially. I just think, he has this relationship with Tom Brady, right? Nobody thought anything of Tom Brady coming out of college. He didn't have any special traits. Like Burrow, what did Tom Brady have? Special intangibles. We didn't know that, right? And I just feel like the upside with Shedeur, where he might not get there, maybe he's never going to be a top 10 quarterback, but I think it could be there because of all the intangibles that he's have. And those things, guys, can't be taught. You can work on footwork. You can work on, whatever. There's other things physically that you can work on to get better. If you're being a great leader, having accuracy to some degree, that can be worked on to some degree. Having the mental aspect of the game to diagnose like Joe Burrow does, you have that or you don't. Those are things that are either in you, and it seems like he has those things.
Well, the thing that I liked about, one, I've been around Joe Burrow. Joe is a dog. Like, Joe is, the one thing I love about Joe is that it don't matter what the score is. If you got Joe Burrow as quarterback, he gonna give you a chance to win the game in the end. And as a football player on a team, that's what you want out of your quarterback. Like, no matter who we going against, it could be the Bears of the 80s. At the end of the game, Joe gonna give us a chance to win this game. And if Shedeur has that same mentality, that's what you need in this locker room. I told y'all the last time I was on about the losing culture and all those things. Yeah. We have to dead that. And if Shedeur is the guy that can change that, that is much better than any other quarterback can do it. If you can change the mentality of the other 52 guys in the locker room, that's what this team needs the most right now. As far as, the accuracy and all those things, a lot of people think that arm talent is just, they got a very strong arm.
Right.
And to me, what's more annoying than going up against somebody with a strong arm is the guy that got great ball placement. And that's another thing that you hear with Shedeur. You know how annoying it is to be all over somebody, all over a receiver to try to make the play, but the ball is just out of your reach. Like, it's so annoying.
Right there.
But we just seen Sean King show the play of him rolling to the left, throwing it on the sideline where only his guy can get it. That's what you want. That's the same thing they said about Joe Burrow. Yeah. His arm isn't that strong, but his placement. C.J. Stroud, another guy, his ball placement was just unbelievable. So when you hear these things, it's like, okay, I would definitely take Shedeur at 2 at these things. I know people are like, well, I don't want to take him at 2. I tell you what, if you don't take him 2, it's a guarantee that the Giants are going to take him at 3. I don't know why everybody's talking talking about he might be there at 21 or 30. No, if you don't take him, the Giants are in the same boat that you're. Unless they sign Russell Wilson, they are in the same boat that you are in. He will be gone at 3. So you have so the Browns are in a predicament with if you really need a quarterback, you have to take that guy because if you don't, you will be looking at the Jalen Milroes and all these other guys.
It's so funny because the Browns showed you what the blueprint is when you draft defensive ends at the top of the draft. Myles Garrett, he's a Hall of Famer, is great. But if you want to rewind back to sticks and you go and you say who they should have took, they should have took Patrick Mahomes. That was the choice.
That's right.
Because you get a guy that's a Hall of Famer does not make you feel comfortable when you still don't win no championships, bro. And you're asking people to do that again. Let's get another defensive end while Washington Commanders get their quarterback, while Chicago gets their quarterback, while everybody gets their quarterback, and then you get halfway through the season and we start talking again. Well, Bull, we can't score any points. Where's our running game at? Yeah. Wow, the defense played really good. I thought they did some things, held them to 14 points, but you got 10 points again. You've been saying the same song and dance since 1999. You've been still doing it. Now look, if you're gonna talk about Shedeur Sanders at 2, there's no such thing as a reach. People talk. A reach is basically saying I'm putting my expectations based on what your opinion of a player is. If you need a quarterback, and somebody else does not have Shedeur Sanders at 2 and he's at 20, why would I base my expectation levels on their scouting department? I hire people.
By the way, Shedeur has played under pressure his whole career. None of these other quarterbacks can say that. Being the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns holds a level of pressure that I don't know if any other job does.
It's a top 5. It's a top 5 pressure job.
There's a level of pressure of every other quarterback has shit to bed. And with him, I don't worry about that. With any other quarterback, I don't know.
And when he comes in here, half the fan base is not going to be on board with it. Not even as half. At least 25% is going to be like
25. I think half strong, but
half is strong. 25%.
If his and ultimately, as I've thought about this more last week, we got John.
Not yet. No.
Not yet. Oh, okay. Then we'll keep going. And the more I've thought about it,
we do have John in 1 sec. So last point.
If Shedeur Sanders was named Larry Jones, and he had played at Ohio State,
go Bucks,
instead of Colorado, my gut tells me he'd be the no-brainer first pick in this draft. And I could be crazy. But we'll see what the future holds.